Hey folks, I'm Mike Ingold. I'm the Studio Safety Coordinator here for the Art and Design Department at UT. Today we're going to go over the process for making a cradled panel. Before we do that, I wanted to mention something. If you're new to this process and you haven't done it before, there's a lot of steps involved. If you get hung up or you're not sure what to do, please don't be afraid to ask me or ask the on-duty woodshop attendee for help. That's what we're here for. So don't try and do it on your own. Make sure you're asking people if you're confused. I do want to talk to you about materials before we get started. You're going to need two basic components for this. One is your panel. Any kind of 1/4-inch plywood will do the job, but I have some recommendations for you. You can buy 1/4-inch plywood with several different species of wood that are on the front and back. Those cost a little bit more. You can also buy what's called 5mm underlayment. It's functionally the same, and for a process where you're going to be painting over it anyway, the species of wood doesn't matter so much, and it'll save you a little bit of money. The panel that you buy comes in a few different possible sizes. You can get a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet, which is most cost effective per square foot. But if you're making a smaller panel, you may not need something that large, or maybe you can't fit it in your car to transport. You can also buy it in a 2-foot by 4-foot size, which usually is a little easier to transport, and for many people will be a little bit easier for working. If you need this panel cut to size that is not one of those, feel free to come into the wood shop and either myself or one of the wood shop employees can cut it for you on the table saw. The second thing you're going to need is your boards, which are going to be the supports for the panel. You have lots of options when you go to any lumber store for what type of boards you want to buy. I highly recommend that you buy select pine boards for a couple reasons. One, pine is the cheapest of woods, so it'll be fairly cost effective rather than buying oak or walnut. But secondly, and most importantly, is that it's select pine is clear, which is to say it has no knots or anything in it, which means it's going to stay straighter longer. If you buy cheaper number 2 pine, over time it will warp. Heck, it may warp by the time you get it into the wood shop. It's a lot more prone to doing that. Select pine comes in a variety of lengths and dimensions. You can buy it in 6-foot and 8-foot lengths. You can also buy it in varying widths. It's always 1 by, which is misleading. 1 by actually means 3/4 of an inch thick, but then the width could vary. So you can buy a 1 by 2, 1 by 3, 1 by 4, so on and so forth. The width is going to depend on the size of the panel that you're building. For smaller panels, like the one I'm going to build today, which is 18 by 24 inches, I got a 1 by 2. If I was going to build something a little larger, if I got over 2-foot by 2-foot, I might go with a 1 by 3. A second thing that you need to be aware of is how you align the wood to the panel when you build. So again, for smaller panels, you could do this. You can take your wood, your board, and you can put it flat to the back of your panel, and that'll offer enough structural integrity to keep the panel nice and rigid while you're working on it. If you're building a slightly larger panel, and again, I'd say at this point, if you're over 2 by 2 or 3 by 3, what you may want to do is switch your wood so that rather than laying flat on the back of your panel, you're going to flip it so that it's perpendicular or standing up relative to the back of your panel. Now, although I'm building a smaller panel today, I'm actually going to use this process so that you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to make sure that my board is perpendicular to my panel as I'm building. Okay, now, as we start to build, we have our length of select pine. Usually it's cut at 90 degrees at both ends. Before I do anything else, no measurements required. The first thing I need to do is take my select pine over to the miter saw, and we're going to cut a 45-degree angle on the end. 45-degree angles for all of our cuts today because we're making 90-degree corners, and anytime I have a 90-degree corner, I need 2 45-degree cuts to come together to make a flush corner. So let's walk over to the miter saw and take a look at that. Okay, so I'm over here at my miter saw. A few things we need to know about the miter saw. One, let's talk about how we get the wood set up. Now, whatever angle I'm going to have my wood at relative to the panel needs to be the same on the saw as it was on the table. So with my panel flat, I want this perpendicular, which means that it's standing up in this case. So I want to make sure my wood is standing up. I want to make sure my wood is always flat to the back or the fence of the table saw. I also want to make sure it's flat to the tabletop. We never want to have it out and away from the fence like this. We never want to have scrap wood underneath that's lifting it up off the table. We have to be flat to the tabletop and flat to the back. Now, before I lock my wood in place, I need to set my miter saw up. So right now it's set at 0 degrees, and there's a little green arrow that points to the miter gauge at the front here, pointing at the number 0. I have the option of rotating to the left to 45-degree angle, or rotating to the right to a 45-degree angle. In this case, it doesn't matter. I just need a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to rotate to the right. Now when I do that, typically when I come to the miter saw, it's going to be locked in place, so it doesn't want to scoot back and forth. I'm going to pop this little handle up in the front, and then there's a thumb button here I'm going to squeeze down, and that allows me to move this left and right. If I'm doing this correctly, it should be relatively easy to glide it back and forth. I'm going to watch that little green arrow as it moves across the miter gauge, and when I get close to 45, so right here I'm at 40, I'm going to let go of the thumb button, then I'm just going to push it over, and I'll hear it click in place. It clicks right into that 45-degree angle for me because it's a common angle. I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure you hear that click when you rotate the miter saw to your 45. Now that I've got my miter saw set up at the angle that I need, I'm going to move my wood. So I'm going to slide it on down. And something that people ask me a lot about the miter saw is how do I turn it on? And a really important thing for you to know is that the miter saw is always on. As long as it's plugged into the wall, it's turned on. The motor can operate at any time. Usually what people are trying to ask is how do I turn on the laser sight? There's a little button in the back here, which is very difficult to find. I don't know why they put it in the back like that. But if I press that button once, I can turn that laser on, and that lets me see where the cut is going to happen. I don't know if it's showing up very well on your on camera, but we can see that there's a laser there now that lets us see where the cut is that we're going to make. So I'm going to slide my wood down until I can see that that 45-degree angle is just going to cut the end off of my wood. I don't want to waste any wood, so I want to make sure I'm cutting right from the end. Now, the next thing that's important is I have to make sure my wood is held in place, and I have a couple ways I can do this. I can hold it with my hand. I'm right-handed, so I tend to want to operate the saw with my right hand, which is going to be up here. Something I want to make sure I never do if I'm going to hold this wood in place is I never cross my hands to hold it in place. So me being right-handed, my natural inclination is to have my hand up here, and my left hand would go over here to hold the wood in place. This is a very bad idea because you can see I've put my forearm directly under the blade. Super dangerous. So in this case, if I have the wood on the right side of the saw, I would want to cut with my left hand and hold the wood with my right hand. And I'm holding on to the wood and to the fence here to make sure it doesn't move. If I had the wood going the other way, which I absolutely can do, again, for this first cut, it doesn't matter how I get a 45-degree angle, I just need a 45-degree angle. If I have the wood on the left side, the opposite would be true. Again, because I'm right-handed, I have a tendency to want to have my hand up on the machine. My left hand then could hold the wood here, and that would be very safe. There's some small marks on the saw here that have a little no hand emblem. As long as our hands are outside of that space, generally speaking, we're safe. Now, if I don't want to worry about where to place my hands, something else I can do is employ the clamps that are attached to the saw. I have one on the left side and one on the right side. I can use either one, but I want to make sure that I never use both. For this cut, I couldn't use both because I'm just taking the end off and the wood doesn't reach this other clamp. But in the future, if I were making a cut somewhere in the middle like so, I would have the option of using either one. And again, it doesn't matter which one you use, you just want to make sure that you choose one. If we use both, sometimes the wood tends to bind up on the blade, it causes excess wear and tear on the motor, and it can make the wood do strange things that we don't want it to do. So in this case, I'll keep my wood on the left side. I slid it down so that I can see it's just going to cut off the corner and make sure it's flat to the tabletop, flat to the back. And then when I want to use this clamp, as long as this little handle is up, it's in the unlocked position, I can rotate it back and forth. I'm going to push that plunger down until it's securely on my wood, hold it in place, and then I'm going to push the lever down. And now my wood's locked in place. It can't go anywhere. So I've got my wood flat to the tabletop, flat to the back. I've moved it left and right to make sure I've got it exactly where I want to cut. I've adjusted the miter gauge to the angle that I need, which is a 45. I'm ready to make my cut. When I'm ready to operate the miter saw, there's a trigger button and a thumb button. And in order to engage the blade, I have to squeeze both of those at the same time. When I do so, I'm going to pull down, and I want the blade to move through the wood at a nice medium pace. I don't want to go too fast or too slow. If I go too fast, I can cause the wood to blow out and send pieces back at me. If I go too slow, I'll leave burn marks. Again, excess wear and tear on the motor as well. So when it's in the up position, I'm going to grab the trigger, I'm going to grab the thumb button, I'm going to squeeze them both, and I'm going to move slowly through my wood. My cut, I want to make sure that I've moved the saw all the way to the down position until I can't move it anymore. I'm going to release the trigger and the thumb button, but then I'm going to hold the saw in the down position until the blade stops spinning. This takes a couple seconds. Some people get really impatient and they want to lift the blade back up quickly. It's really important that we don't do that though, because if we move the blade back up while it's still spinning, it's very possible that it can catch little scraps of wood like this that we've created and send them bouncing around the shop, which obviously would be super dangerous. So make sure the blade stays in the down position until you've finished your cut. Any scraps that you create, unless you want them for some reason, I don't want them, make sure they go into the trash can. Once I finish my cut, I'm going to lift up on the lever on my clamp, and then lift up on the plunger, and then I can walk back over to my work area at the table. Now that we have a 45-degree angle on one end of our select pine, what I'm going to do is take that and set it right on top of my panel and make a direct comparison so I can figure out the length I need for one side of the support. Now, as you do this, make sure that the wood, again, stays in the same orientation that it was on the saw. So I want to make sure in this case it's standing up. As I set it onto the wood, I'm going to take that corner that I just created and I'm going to line it up with the corner of my panel. I'm going to take the edge of the wood and I'm going to make sure it's flush with the edge of the panel. And then I'm going to grab a pencil and I'm going to make 3 marks on the other side. I'm going to take my time with this process. The more careful and accurate I am right now, the much more better outcome I will have when I'm finished with this. So I've got this corner lined up, my edge is perfectly flush. I'm going to get down low and I'm going to take a look at where the edge of the panel and my wood come together. I'm not marking on the inside, I'm marking on the outside, the exterior. I'm going to make one line that indicates to me the length of the wood. So this tells me how long this piece needs to be, right, from corner to corner. The second mark I'm going to make is to remind myself of what angle I need to cut when I get over there. I know that it's a 45-degree angle, but it's easy to forget if I want it to be a 45 this way or a 45 that way. All of our 45s should point toward the center of the panel. Anytime I'm making one length, the 45 at one end should be opposite the 45 at the other end. So I'm going to make a little mark here. That's a 45-degree angle pointed that direction. That's not where I'm going to cut. It's just a reminder of which direction I need the blade to be when I get over there. And then the third mark I'm going to make is to remind myself which is the keep side of my wood and which is the scrap side of my wood. This is important because when we make our second cut, we have to set up the blade on the correct side of our mark. And I'll explain more about that later. Typically, carpenters, when they do this, the keep section of the wood stays clear. The scrap section of the wood will get an X or something like that. Okay, now that I've made my 3 marks, and I'll flip this over, you can see I've got my mark for length, I've got a mark for angle, and I've got a mark for scrap. Now, I do want to point out that I'm doing the longer side of my panel before I do the short side of my panel. And the reason why I'm doing that is if I make a mistake this first couple times as I'm making the first couple supports, and I cut this to a length that isn't going to work for me, I can still use it for a short side. So I end up creating less scraps. You're less likely to make mistakes by the 3rd or 4th time you're making a side, so we always do the long sides first. Okay, now I'm ready to take this back over to the miter saw and make my second cut. Okay, so I've got my wood back to the miter saw. Orientation, again, is really important. I've got the 3 marks I made. There's length, there's angle, and there's scrap. I want to make sure I can see them. A common mistake that people make is they bring their wood over and they flip it the opposite direction so that all of the marks that they've just made are hidden. Obviously, that's not going to be very helpful to you. So I want to make sure I can see all 3 marks. We're going to make sure the orientation is the same. So once again, because I'm keeping my back perpendicular to my panel, it's going to be standing up vertically here. I'm going to make sure it's flat to the tabletop, flat to the back. I'm going to slide it back and forth. Now, that laser guide that we talked about earlier, something that you might notice is that there are actually 2 lasers right beside one another with about an 1/8 of an inch gap in between them. What those indicate is the width of the blade. So unlike a knife blade, which just cuts something into 2 pieces, a saw blade is actually thick, about an 1/8 of an inch thick. And when it cuts, it removes an 1/8 of an inch of material each time it makes a cut. So I want to make sure I don't set my blade up on my mark. I want to set it beside the mark so that the edge of the blade is aligned with the length that I've just identified. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull just the trigger button and not the thumb button. Doing that allows me to lower the saw without turning the blade up. Sometimes the saw gets a little sticky, you just got to give it a little bit of a pull. When I pull it down, I can see that 2 lasers are projected onto the front of my wood, and I want to make sure that I set it up so that one of those lasers is aligned with the length I just created, and the other one falls into the scrap side. So the rule of thumb here is 2 lasers, 1 laser goes on my mark, the other laser goes into the scrap side. This is going to ensure that the blade is aligned so that the side of the blade will be on our cut rather than the center of the blade. Very important. If I do this wrong, my wood will end up too short. That's the common mistake and why you may end up using this for one of the other sides, right? That's why we do the long sides first. Once I've got 1 laser lined up with my mark, the other laser in the scrap, I'm going to make sure that I clamp my wood in place when I can. So same deal, I press the plunger down until it touches my wood, I hold it in place, and then I press the lever down. Now the wood's in place. I squeeze the trigger button and the thumb button, and I make my second cut. Once again, I hold the blade in the down position after releasing the trigger and thumb button to make sure it comes to a complete stop before I lift it back up. Once I've got my second cut done, I can release my clamp, lift up the lever, lift up the plunger, and we're going to take both of these pieces back to our work area. So, a good practice now is to take that piece of wood I've just cut and compare it to the side. Make sure that I didn't make any errors. As long as both of my corners line up with the corners of the panel, I'm in good shape. Now, it is important that I know that this piece goes specifically to this side of my panel. Although we'd like to think with a perfect rectangle, this side and this side are the exact same length, unfortunately that's probably not true. There's just a little bit of error in the machinery that we use. The two lengths may be slightly different, so we're going to make sure that we know this goes to this side. In order to do that, I'm going to label this piece, piece A, and I'm going to label this side of my panel, side A. Now I know that they go together. Once we've done that, I can set this aside, and I'm going to move on to my second support. Now, because we just made a 45-degree cut, completing our first side, we already have a 45-degree angle ready to go on our piece of select pine. So I'm going to do that same process a second time. I'm going to take this corner, the 45 I just created, I'm going to line it up with the corner, opposite corner of my panel. I'm going to make sure that the edge is flush, and I'm going to make the same 3 marks that I did before. So once again, I'm marking on the outside of the panel, never the inside. I'm going to get down low so I can be accurate. I'm going to make 1 mark for length. I'm going to make my second mark to indicate what angle. I'm going to make my third mark for scrap. And once I have those 3 marks, I can once again walk over to the miter saw to make my third cut. Now, something you may notice is that each time I walk over to the miter saw, I haven't had to move the saw back and forth. That's because I've made a lot of panels and I have a system where I know that if I set it up a particular way there, it'll stay the same as I walk it over here. It's highly possible that when you do this, you may have to rotate the saw back and forth. If you need to do that, once again, all you're going to do is lift up on this handle, squeeze the thumb button, and slide. Watch that little green arrow. When you get close to 45, let go of the thumb button and push until it clicks into place. If I need to slide it the other way, squeeze the thumb button, slide it across. When I get close to 45, so I'm at 42, 43, I let go of the thumb button, push until I hear it click into place. It's essential that you hear it click into place. I'm going to repeat the same process. The laser's already on. I slide my wood until I think I'm close. I'm going to pull just the trigger until I can project the 2 laser lines onto the front of my wood. I'll slide my wood left or right until I line up 1 laser with my mark and the second laser into the scrap side. Once I've got that in place, I'll clamp it. So I press down on the plunger, press down on the lever, and I'm ready to make my third cut. Squeeze the trigger and thumb button. Gonna make sure the blade comes to a complete stop before I lift it back up. Release the clamp, and we're gonna take both pieces back to our work area. So once again, it's always good practice to take that piece you just made, compare it to the side that it's going on, and make sure that it's the correct length. If it's not, you may have to redo your cut. Mine looks pretty good. So that was side A, and that's piece A. This is going to be piece B and side B. Now, I would typically continue doing this process in order to speed it up a little bit for the sake of the video. I've already made the other 2 sides. So I've got, let's see, side C goes to side C over here, and side D goes to side D. So I've got all 4 of my pieces ready to go. Something that I didn't mention earlier is making sure that the length of the select pine that you get is proportional to the number of, or the length of the sides that you're going to be making. My panel is 18 by 24, so it's 24 inches, which is 2 feet, 24 inches, which is 2 feet, so that's 4 feet for those 2 sides, and then 18 inches, which is 1.5 feet, 18 inches, which is 1.5 feet, so 1.5 feet together, that's 3 feet, so I had 4 feet plus 3 feet, that's 7 feet to do the outer edge of this panel. Now, that being the case, I needed something that was going to be at least 7 feet long, and because select pine comes in lengths of either 6 feet or 8 feet, an 8-foot piece was the correct buy for me. If you're doing larger panels, you can split it up so that maybe 2 sides come out of 1 piece. So if you were doing a 4-foot by 3-foot panel, you might get 1 8-foot length to do your 2 4-foot sides, and then 1 6-foot length to do your 2 3-foot sides. So it required 2 pieces. Okay, now that I've got all 4 of my sides ready to go, it's time to start connecting them. The tools I'm going to need for this are wood glue and a crown stapler. Crown stapler can be found in the black cabinets on the other side of the shop. You're going to look for the door that says nail guns and staple guns, and then just read the guns. All of them are labeled. This one says crown stapler across the back, crown stapler across the side. So crown stapler is what we need. Some things to know about the crown stapler. It is a pneumatic gun. It's powered by compressed air. We have 3 air hoses in the shop. You can see them on the walls when you come in. Before I connect it to air, I need to make sure it's loaded with staples. Again, in the black cabinets, there's an area that says nails and staples. You're going to open that up. You'll see a bin that says crown staples. Crown staples go in the crown stapler, obviously. In order to load and unload, I want to make sure that I do this before I've plugged into the air. So there's a little gray button on the bottom of the gun. I'm going to flip the gun so that it's pointing up in the air. I'm going to press the gray button and the front will open up like so. I'm going to grab my crown staples, and the pointy side of the staple, which is going to be coming out of the front of the gun, stays up. When I drop it in, I just want to make sure that it doesn't tip over or anything. Once I've dropped my staples in, I just push that closed and I'm ready to go. Some safety features of the gun. We have a trigger here. Typically when I pull that, a staple will fire. Because I'm not connected to the air yet, nothing will happen. Even once I'm connected to the air, if I try to pull the trigger, it still won't fire because there's a safety tip. In order for me to fire a staple out of this gun, I have to compress that safety tip and then squeeze the trigger. So I would take my tip, set it on my piece of wood, and then squeeze the trigger, and that will fire a staple, right? For that reason, I want to make sure I never compress the safety tip on anything other than something that I want to shoot a staple into. So I never be standing around thinking, doing this kind of thing or this kind of thing, because I don't want to accidentally shoot myself with a staple gun. Once I've got my gun loaded, I'm aware of the safety features. I can connect it to the air hose. All of our air hoses have a quick connect on the end that looks like this. It's a pressure fit, so I'm going to take the end of my gun, I'm going to put it into the quick connect, I'm going to hear one click, and then I need to hear a second click. It takes a little bit of pressure to get that second click. If I needed to take the gun out, or when I'm done, to undo that, there's a little silver button. I'm going to press it once, that releases the air pressure, and I'm going to press it twice, and that releases the tool. So it's 2 clicks in, 2 clicks out. So again, first click is easy, second click takes a little bit of work. Once I'm connected to the air, I never want to put my finger on the trigger until I'm ready to actually fire a staple. So I'm going to set this aside. Now, I'm going to be working, it doesn't matter where we start here. I happen to have side B in front of me, so I've got piece B, that's where I'm going to start. I want to make sure that I decide at this point which side of my panel is going to be the side I want to paint on. It's user choice here. You get to decide which looks better. This side does have a big fill piece, which I'm not in love with. If I flip it over, the back side has a big knot. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I think I will put the knot on the front and leave the big filler piece in the back. But that's a fairly arbitrary choice. All right, so I've got side B in front of me. Important thing to know, whatever side is going to be the side we paint on is going to be facing up. We're going to work with our support structure underneath the panel. I've got side B in front of me, I've got piece B in front of me. I'm going to set this on top. Now, something you'll notice is that this is at a slant now, which makes it difficult to make a secure connection for this joint. So I'm going to take 2 of my other pieces, and I'm going to use them just to prop this up so that it's nice and level while I work. Okay, so now I've got a nice level working surface. Before I start putting staples in here, I'm going to use wood glue to make sure that seam is going to be nice and strong. As I put the wood glue on, I don't need to go crazy. A little bit goes a long way. It's important to know that wood glue is the thing that makes your panel strong. You can put a million staples in there, but if you don't have wood glue in there, the panel will not be strong. I got my wood glue on, I slide it underneath my edge. Again, folks, can't stress this enough, another common mistake. Remember that you're working from the front of the panel. Your supports are going to go underneath. We're going to be stapling through the front of your panel. Once I have my side in place, and I want to, again, take my time here, make sure I'm being careful and accurate. Both of my corners are lined up, my edge is totally flush. I'm going to grab my staple gun, and something that I want to visualize is that the corner of this panel, again, the support underneath is cut at a 45-degree angle, and it's only 3/4 of an inch thick. So I don't have a huge work area to be able to put staples into. If I put a staple directly at the edge of my panel, it won't hit anything because that 45-degree angle has been cut on the support underneath. So think about that before you fire your first staple. I've got my support in place. I'm going to hold it with one hand. I'm going to take the staple gun. Once again, my finger is not on the trigger until I'm ready to fire. I'm going to move toward that corner. I'm going to move in by a little bit so I avoid the edge, and I'm going to move up by a little bit. And then I press down on my safety. I've got active downward pressure, and I squeeze the trigger. I do one staple, and then I'm going to make sure nothing is moved. Sometimes when we do that first staple, the wood will shift around a little bit and we'll accidentally get an edge that's not lined up very well. Everything looks pretty good, so now I'm going to do the other corner. So same process. I got to remember that there's a 45-degree angle under here, and then it's only 3/4 of an inch thick. So when I set my safety down, I'm moving up and away from that corner by a little bit, and I never touch the trigger until I'm ready to fire. Once I've got the 2 corners in place, now I'm going to put a few staples along the side. Every 6 inches or so will do the job. So in this case, I think 2 more will work for me. If I had a much larger panel, right, something that's 3 foot by 4 foot, again, every 6 inches or so along that side. I've got my first side done. Now I'm going to do my next side. In this case, rather than working across, which we did when we were cutting our pieces, we're going to work around. So it doesn't matter if I go to the left or to the right, but I'm just going to rotate and do whichever piece is adjacent to the one I just did. My labels are on the bottom, so now on the bottom I'm going to go to side D, which is this piece. I'm still going to use this extra piece to hold my panel flat so that I've got a nice level working surface. Once again, I need to apply glue. So I go along the edge. And then because we already have this piece in place, I want to get glue in that corner too. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue along that 45-degree angle next to the piece that's already there. Don't put glue on the other side yet. We're going to wait until we have the next piece ready for that. I lift this up and slide my piece underneath. Now, I'm going to really take my time here and make sure that corner is flush. So I have this support that I've already fastened. My next support, I want to make sure that where they touch in that corner, I've got a nice tight connection. Take your time here, folks. There's no rush. The glue won't set up on you. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure my wood is nice and flush along the edge of the panel. And then I'm going to repeat that same process. I'm going to take my staple gun. I'm going to move toward one corner, press down on the safety, squeeze the trigger. I'm going to make sure nothing is moved, make sure my support is exactly where I want it to be. And then I will do the other corner. And then one or two in between, again, every 6 inches or so. I'm going to rotate now to the next adjacent side, which is side A. At this point, the panel kind of holds itself level. I've got piece A here. Repeat this process. I'm going to add glue along the edge. And then once again, I'm going to add glue in the corner that's adjacent to the support that's already fastened. Wait for the other corner. I don't want to put glue there yet. I slide it underneath. And again, folks, I'm just going to take my time, be really careful, make sure that those corners line up well. Once I've got this corner nice and tight, I make sure that the edge is nice and flush. Staple my first corner. Make sure nothing is moved. Staple my second corner. And then I can do a couple in between. Finally, we're to our fourth side. Now, before you put the fourth side on, I'm going to recommend that you check fit. Sometimes, depending on how things have lined up, when you try to put this fourth side in, things can get a little bit hairy. So I'm going to slide this underneath, make sure that it's nice and tight. In this case, it looks great. If you find that the piece doesn't want to go all the way in, it's a little bit too big, you may need to take it back over to the miter saw and just trim a tiny bit off. I can't stress enough though, just take a little off at a time, right? Okay, mine looks great. I'm going to add glue to the edge. This time, because I have an adjacent support here and an adjacent support on the other side, I'm going to put glue on both ends. So now all four corners have also got glue in them. I slide it underneath, make sure my corners are nice and tight, there are no gaps, and I repeat the process. I do one corner, make sure nothing is moved, do the second corner, and then anything in between. And we're in pretty good shape. At this point, I'm going to flip this over. I want to see that I have no gaps in any of my corners. That's really important. If you do, that's a problem. You may want to talk to me or talk to the on-duty woodshop employee to help you fix that. Now we need to secure these corners. We want to fasten them together. The glue is good, but we want to have something, a fastener that holds it together. I'm going to switch tools now. So I've been using the crown stapler. I'm going to disconnect that. I'm going to press this over button once to release the air, second time to release the tool. And this time I'm going to switch to my brad nailer. It looks almost the same, but rather than firing staples, this one fires nails. Again, we need to load it before we start. Once again, there's a little gray button at the bottom here. I squeeze that and the side opens up. This case, because we're loading in nails, they go in on the side, whereas with the crown stapler, they went in on the front. You're going to find the nails in the black cabinet in the area where it says nails and staples. The length of the nail is really important. I'm using 1 1/4 inch. 1 1/4 inch works good for 3/4 inch material. When I put the nails in, they do have a head and a point. I want to make sure the point is toward the front of the gun and the head is toward the back of the gun. I put them as far forward as I can in that cartridge area, slide them up, and then I close this up. Now, there's a little window here that lets me see if I still have nails in the gun. Occasionally, while you're working, you won't realize that you've run out of nails, and the gun, unfortunately, will still fire and sound, and it'll even look like you're putting a nail in the hole. I've definitely seen students who've built a whole panel not realizing they were out of fasteners, and then when they pick it up to leave, it all kind of falls apart. So keep an eye on that little window on your nail gun or your staple gun. This has the same safety feature. So it's got a spring compressed tip for our safety on the front, connects to air in the same way. So 1 click is easy, 2 clicks takes a little bit of pressure, and now I'm ready to connect my corners. What I like to do is bring my panel right to the edge of the table. I'm going to take my nail gun and I'm going to hold it sideways, and I'm going to hold onto this support with one hand, hold onto the nail gun with the other hand. And if I have any gaps, I can create a little bit of pressure there to kind of push the wood together. I make sure that the safety gets compressed, and then I squeeze the trigger. Be careful that you're not tilting your nail gun back or forth or up or down, because you don't want a nail to poke out the side here. So I get it lined up in the center, press down my safety, squeeze the trigger. Now I did 1 nail this way, I'm going to do 1 nail going the opposite way. Same process, I'm going to hold on to this edge, press the nail gun against the opposite piece, create a little bit of pressure, and then squeeze my trigger. Because I'm using 1x2 material, 2 nails in each corner is probably fine. If I were using 1x3, I might do 3 nails, or do 2 in one direction and 1 in the other direction. The longer or the thicker the wood is, the more nails you would need in the corner. We're going to do that process for all 4 corners. So I'm going to do 1 nail this direction, and I'm going to do the second nail the opposite direction. When I do those nails, I stagger them. So 1 nail is high and 1 nail is low. I don't want the 2 nails to hit each other, right? Third corner, being careful not to tilt the gun. If I'm working on a smaller panel, again, this 18x24 size, my supports are done at this point. I don't need to add anything else. If I were working on a larger panel, say 3 foot by 4 foot, something of that nature, I'm probably going to want to add some more supports in the back so that the panel isn't floppy. So, although I don't really need them for a panel this size, I'm still going to show you how to make them. There are a couple types of supports you can do. You can do cross supports, it's something that goes across the panel like this, or you can do corner supports, something that goes at a 45-degree angle like this. Depending on the size of your panel, you may need to do one or both. I always start with corner supports, something that goes at a diagonal. Those will create the most structural integrity for a large panel. So if you just do cross supports, sometimes it'll still feel a little bit floppy, but if you get something going at a diagonal, those triangles make the shape really strong. So going corner to corner is always going to be a good option. Now, when we do this, measuring is a little bit important, but most of it can be done relatively simply. So if I know that this is 18 inches across, I just need to kind of figure what's the halfway point here, and I don't even need to be perfect about it. And then if I have a piece of select pine, maybe I have some left over from what I was already making. In this case, I do have one small piece left. Or maybe I have to go get a new piece. Once again, I'm going to start with a 45-degree angle. So just as we did when we started our panel, if I have only 90-degree angles on my select pine, I'm going to walk over to the miter saw and create a 45-degree angle first. I'm going to take that 45-degree angle and I'm going to bring it to the inside edge of my panel. And I'm going to set it so that it's flush. And I want to make sure that I'm on my side of what would be about the halfway point, and I might even give myself a little bit of room. So if that's the halfway point, I might be an inch in from that. I'm going to set this up so that one side is resting on the other support, and then this side is flush against the inside there. And then I'm going to take my pencil, and underneath I'm going to make a little mark like so. This doesn't have to be perfect, I just need an approximate length. So I've got a mark there. So that's going to be my length and my angle in this case, and then I'm going to make a mark for scrap. And now I can take this wood over to my saw and make another 45-degree cut. So just as we did before, I'm going to make sure that I have my wood flat to the tabletop and flat to the back. I'm going to slide it back and forth until I get it lined up where I want it to be with my laser. Again, if you need to turn the laser on, just remember that button is kind of hidden in the back here. I press it one time and the laser shows up. In this case, because my mark is on the top, I can see the laser pretty well. If I need to, once again, I can squeeze the trigger and lower this down, and that will allow me to see the laser a little bit easier. Once I've got this lined up, again, my laser is on my mark, the extra laser is in the scrap side. I'm going to clamp it in place, and then I'm going to make my cut. Make sure the blade comes to a complete stop, unclamp my wood, and then I can walk back over to my work area. Again, these diagonal supports aren't necessary for every panel you make. I'd say once you get up to that 3 foot, 4 foot size, that's when they become important. You'll notice if you make a large panel that when you pick it up, it still feels like it's got a lot of flexibility or bendability. These corner supports will really make a difference there. With a panel this small, I don't really need it. I'm just doing it for the sake of showing you the process. Once I've got this 45-degree angle cut on both sides, I can sort of drop it in here and see how it's going to fit in place. And it'll kind of automatically align because those two 45s want to be flat to the two adjacent support sides. So I'm going to take my glue, add a little bit on each end. And again, with your glue, you don't need to go crazy. A little goes a long way. And then I'm going to add glue along the bottom edge as well. Set that in place, like so. All right, and now we're going to continue using our brad nailer with the 1 1/4 inch nails. I have a couple options for nailing this, and depending again on the size of your panel or where these supports end up, how close they are to one another, sometimes it's easier to nail from the outside, sometimes it's easier to nail from the inside. Either way is okay. I generally recommend nailing from the outside. That way, in case a nail goes through this wood and through that wood and sticks out on the interior, it's not going to be something that is sticking out of your panel. You'd rather have it on the inside. But if for some reason that isn't going to work for me, I can nail from the inside. When I'm ready to nail this in place, I'm going to take my brad nailer and line it up. And I've got, because this is at a 45-degree angle, at one end here the wood is quite thin, and at the other end it's a little bit thicker. I'm going to line up my nail gun so I'm heading into that thicker piece of the corner support. So I'm going to hold this in place with one hand. I'm going to line up my brad nailer on the outside, and I'm going to hit it 2 times. Once at the top, I'll lower my gun a little bit and hit it again at the bottom. And then I'm going to rotate my panel to the other side and repeat this process. So once again, the long end of our support is a little bit thin there, and I don't want my nail to poke through, so I'm going to be towards the inside, which is a little bit thicker. One nail high, one nail low. When you're using the brad nailer, or the crown stapler for that fact, you want to be thoughtful about where your other hand is. If your other hand is very close to where you're fastening, occasionally a nail or staple will pop out of the wood and it'll poke you, which is very unpleasant. So if I'm nailing like this, I would never want to have my hand close to the wood like this. I always want to have it some distance away so that the nail couldn't get to it. So if I need to have corner supports, I would repeat that process 3 more times. So once again, all I need to do is cut a 45, place it along the inside, somewhere on the close side of the halfway point, and then mark the other side, cut it, drop it in, and nail it. It's a relatively simple process. If you have a very large panel, once you do all 4 corners, you may want to do 2 or 1 or 2 across like that. But again, same process. Cut one side, mark it with your pencil, and then drop it in and nail it from the outside. Okay, we're very, very close to done. The last thing we need to do is finish our front. So I have all of these little staple holes, and I don't want those to be a part of my painting. Sometimes as we're stapling, the staples don't go in as deep as we need them to, and they stick out of the wood. That's a problem. We need those staples to be flush or below the surface of the wood. If you realize this is happening, on your crown stapler, in front of the trigger there's a little red wheel. You can see that there's a diagram that shows you if you spin it one way, it'll cause the staples to sit higher. If you spin it the other way, it'll cause the staples to sit lower. Same thing is true with the brad nailer. In this case, mine are sitting a little bit high, so I probably would have rotated that wheel to help fix that problem. If we miss it though, it's okay, it's still solvable. On the pegboard wall, I have this object, which is a nail set. It's a piece of steel that has a slight point on the end, and then I'm going to grab myself a hammer, which is also on the pegboard wall. I'm going to take the nail set and put it right on top of my staple, and I'm going to give it a ding with the hammer. If I have any that are sticking up, I can hit all of them. Sometimes I need to hit it twice, once over each side of the staple. So I'm going to fill them. There are a couple products I could use. I could use regular wood filler, but the thing I actually like is drywall spackle. It dries faster, it's a little bit cheaper, it's generally easier to apply. To get this open, sometimes you have to take your spackle knife and kind of pry it open. The spackle knives are located on the pegboard with the other tools near the sink in the wood shop, and the spackle itself is located on the door with many other supplies. This particular type is pink, and then when I put it on, as it dries, it'll turn white. It sort of helps me to identify when it's ready. So I'm going to take my spackle knife and just scoop a small amount. It doesn't need to be much. It's sort of the size of a marble maybe. And I don't want to leave extra spackle on the panel because it's just more sanding for me later. So it's a 2-step thing. I'm going to push spackle into the hole, push spackle into the hole, and I'm going to scrape it off. I want to scrape off as much as I can. Don't leave a lot of excess. Sometimes I see people do this and they think, all right, that's good, that's good. It's just going to create a lot of sanding for you later. So you want to scrape off any extra spackle. Got one that's still sticking up here. If you go to spackle and you realize you can still see the top of the staple, that means it's sitting too high. Once again, I'll fill that and I'll scrape the extra off. All right, any extra spackle you have left, you can put it back into the container. And then folks, I'm gonna ask that you please make sure the lid to that container is on tight. You can't just set it on because it'll dry out. You need to take your spackle, make sure it gets closed up. Okay, we're done with our panel. The last thing that's important to do is make sure that you clean up. Remember, this is a communal space, so we wanna make sure all tools go back to their homes and everything gets taken care of. There's brooms and dustpans behind me on the wall here. You can sweep up your areas if you've made a mess. You can use the air hose to blow off the miter saw or your work area. Remember folks, if you have any questions or if you're unsure, please come talk to me or talk to the on-duty woodshop employee. Don't try and do anything you're uncomfortable with. If you have questions, contact me. I look forward to seeing you in the shop.